Hey, wherever you are in the world, and welcome. My name is Roxi, and I am one of your intrepid hosts for today, the director of the Design Science Studio, which is a program of the Buckminster Fuller Institute and Hub Ritual. It is a decade-long anticipatory art and design-driven incubator for revolutionary creators, articulating a world that works for 100% of life. The studio promotes the power of art and design as a cross-cultural language for systemic change, with the mission of guiding and empowering voices that propel a regenerative future. It's designed to help engineer new visions of what's possible in partnership with thought leaders, organizations, and initiatives working for a future that is regenerative and just. We are so honored to have incredible presenters today here with us in this first live session. We also have an amazing experience online that if you haven't already tuned into, we are so excited to share with you. The platform is called Topia, and it is one way to begin to explore the work of the studio and this global movement that we are all a part of. This first session today is in Agora, and we have some wonderful hosts who will be here with you to support this journey forward. A little bit about where we're coming from and why we're here. So as we are all, wherever you are tuning in from in the world, we are in this time of radical change, and this othering and alienation from nature is the root cause of the separation that we are experiencing. And so as creators and as a community, we have banded together in this time because we know that there is a new way forward that's possible, that leaves no one behind. This new narrative and this new path is one that is inclusive and is inspired by and driven through a relationship with each other and nature that is grounded in equity for all. And in this time, the Design Science Studio was born, and in alignment with Buckminster Fuller's vision to make the world work for all life in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without the ecological offense or disadvantage of anyone. And this time has perhaps never been more right. I'm here with many of the leads from the organizations, and one of which is Faith Flanagan from the Buckminster Fuller Institute. So Faith would love to welcome you here as we welcome and journey into this day together.
Thank you, Roxi. It's such a pleasure to be here with all the incredible artists that are going to be presenting today, as well as some incredible speakers. On behalf of Buckminster Fuller Institute, we are so proud to say we've come a long way in the studio, and today is going to be an exceptional treat for everyone. And yeah, just happy to be here. Thank you, Roxi.
Yes, of course. So as we welcome all of you into Agora for the day, one thing that I wanted to just share with you is that at its core, the presentations and conversations in Agora will explore the work that individuals that are sharing are doing to bring forth a world that works for all life. Within this field, the space of developmental discourse designed for connection and possibility as we move from the whole to the whole, as we dissolve to bloom. And so in this moment, I am honored to introduce you all to our some of the hosts and leads for Agora today, Stephen Bow and Carson Bow.
Thank you, Roxi. So we're really excited to be convening everyone here in this gathering place that we are calling the Agora. So we're drawing from the ancient Greek history, where in Athens there was an experiment in democracy, and the Agora was the place where everyone would meet to decide how the life of the city would be decided and run, and explored. So in that conversation, we are inviting everyone into a space where we can come away from maybe the places where we're in a state of fear and feeling like we're trapped in our homes in a state of agoraphobia. So here in the Agora is where we want to gather and find a place of being centered and grounded and more connected to each other and connected to the living systems of the planet. So I'd like to introduce to you today my dear friend and colleague in the design science studio, Carson. In the Weimar Republic, they realized, well, we have this opportunity now to be able to think about how do we move from this collapsed aristocracy to a different way of gathering together as a democratic people who are experimenting with a new way of being with each other and then figuring out what does the modern world look like. So they actually gathered artists and architects and sculptors and painters from around the world to convene and gather at the Bauhaus and think about what does the modern world look like. So it meant new ways of thinking about what kind of materials do we work with, what kind of pedagogy or teaching programs should we put together, how do we work together effectively and be able to collaborate. So that's how I've come to look at what they've done over the past 101 years. And you know, the Bauhaus was shut down after only 14 years by Nazis saying, well, whatever you're doing here is degenerate art, so we can't have that happening here. What that did was it just spread those ideas around the world, and inadvertently the ideas that the Nazis were trying to shut down actually proliferated, but then also got translated into a different way of integrating into a different social system. So if you start off with a very socialist utopian idea, when it's translated into the American context, as the masters of the Bauhaus became involved with different educational institutions in America, like the new Bauhaus in Chicago, Gropius at Harvard, I believe, and Marcel Breuer, I think might have been at Yale. Joseph Albers at Black Mountain College. There's all of these different influences that were happening in the United States. And with Joseph Albers, he was actually working with Buckminster Fuller there with reimagining, well, how do we take the Bauhaus pedagogy and then move it into this context where we also want to understand our materials really well before we are able to build the new models for the future. And there, Buckminster Fuller was playing around with ideas of how to take those ideas of tensegrity and different models of geometry and apply that in the real world. And so that's how we get to this place where we're at, where we're looking back and realizing there's some things that we did really well, but there were a lot of things that didn't go well. So a lot of what I'm speaking to in my practice is design for resilience. If you design for things that will go wrong, then you actually have to take in mind, well, before we try to scale a technology to maybe the scale of the Earth, maybe we need to test it well within a smaller group in a more localized area before we scale it to the measure of the Earth. And that's kind of what we're running into right now, is this problem of the social dilemma. If no one's ever seen that documentary, there's an amazing documentary on Netflix that is talking about how we came to a place where our social systems are actually dividing us into political camps, or looking at us really as maybe just sites of extraction for the economy that we're part of. And is there a way of looking at design in a different way? And I'm wondering, for you in your practice, how did you come to be inspired to a way of thinking about starting something called meta pattern, and what brought that about?
Love that you asked. And some of the themes that I really just sing to me in your share, this through line, you talked about the scientific method, you talked about kind of computational propaganda in the age of social media that we're in. And what I feel that's kind of guiding us through this whole journey from, again, Pythagoras sort of putting the pieces together and finding the common patterns that give rise to life, through to Athens and democracy as this sort of synthetic function, synthesizing function of bringing in diverse perspectives to find a unified whole, through to the Bauhaus, when you had a movement, again, this movement of science, the scientific method is all about breaking things into smaller and smaller pieces, in fragmenting them and analyzing them and knowing how the pieces work. And Bucky and the Bauhaus really saw that as a dangerous trend if it's not counterbalanced by a synthetic function, by an integrative function, by a comprehensive anticipatory function that sees things again in their wholeness. What inspired me so much about the Bauhaus was that it was a transdisciplinary school that looked at the whole of life, that took the whole of life as the medium of design, that took the whole of the designer as the medium of design. You know, they had classes in meditation, they did breath work and gymnastics together, they integrated each of them individually and then together socially. And that was mirrored, that synthesizing function was mirrored in the interpersonal daily practices, in the social practices, and in the architecture. And then that was built as an integral incubator to then build integrative products for the rest of the world. So that was a huge inspiration to me personally. In fact, a fun little tidbit of like history about the Design Science Studio, even in the Buckminster Fuller Institute. One of the modern leaders of the Buckminster Fuller Institute is a man named Tom Chi, incredible visionary, genius, and a big inspiration and mentor of mine. And I was lucky enough to visit the Bauhaus archive with him in Berlin some years ago. And, you know, we took it in, we drank all this beautiful inspiration and all their color theory sketches and their art and the photographs of their incredible Halloween parties. And they made these sculptural costumes. And just like the culture was just the coolest thing happening in the world in 1925, 1930. But we looked at it all, and Tom says to me, he says, Carson, if you follow this to its extreme, you wind up with a glass cube Apple store on Central Park. This like reductive function that got kind of co-opted by industrialization, that wanted to make things efficiently. It's sort of taking the humanity, taking the ecology all out of it and leaving just this pure sense of essence. And he asked Carson, what would a 21st century Bauhaus look like? What would nature's Bauhaus look like? What would an integral Bauhaus look like? And that question really lodged in my soul. I wound up founding a little creative community in San Francisco called Bauhaus, sort of inspired by that question. And even Design Science Studio was in some way a response to that question. What would an integral Bauhaus look like? Because for so long, like we've still, like even with the instinct toward pattern, still been forgetting more and more of the externalities, of the social externalities, of the ecological externalities. And so I think the opportunity that we have now is to become truly comprehensive anticipatory design scientists, as Bucky said. I'd actually love you to connect those dots too, because Bauhaus led to Bucky and sort of forked from the Bauhaus. And they all showed up together in the woods, but in 1940 something at the Black Mountain College. Bucky's first dome experiment was at this sort of like rogue neo-Bauhaus in the like southern mountains of the United States. And that was this whole lineage that gave rise. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, you're going to ask me about something that I may know a lot about tangentially, but I'm learning more about that this year, that I actually hadn't been aware of those connections before that. And so it's really interesting to even look into the history of that connection, and how even the FBI was wondering, well, what's going on here? Right. Something nefarious enough that we're going to open a file on Black Mountain College and figure out what they're up to. But it seemed like a place where, you know, Josef Albers was one of the masters from the Bauhaus. He was actually one of the students originally who was then brought into the role of a master in the later years of the Bauhaus. And then when he emigrated to the United States, he came to Black Mountain College, to a very new school where they're thinking about, well, how do we think about taking what we learned from the Bauhaus and create a different kind of pedagogy, a way of training the designers of the future to actually really understand well the materials that they're working with. And so before you can go anywhere with your art, you really need to understand how do you understand your craft? How do you become proficient in the materials that you're working with, so that you know what works and what doesn't? And it takes direct experience, a really holistic way of working. So a big part of what the Bauhaus was up to was bringing in the beginning some ideas about color theory, about understanding what materials can work together, or innovative ways of thinking. Well, just, you have certain constraints around what you're able to do, but that actually opens up your creativity once you understand, okay, I understand these materials, then I'm able to be able to draw from those ideas and then expand thinking as we go from this really messy stage at the beginning of design, where it's very, very, very much around ideation and iteration and going through a lot of ideas before you get to some good ideas. And it seems like that's kind of what we've been doing for maybe a larger scale of time from the beginning of the Bauhaus till now. But it makes us think about, well, I think we've done really well at maybe understanding how to create the built environment in ways that are efficient and using available materials and the industrial manufacturing processes in a way that has transformed our world very quickly. But when we look at what we've done, we realize, well, maybe some of those things didn't go quite so well. If architecture is being imposed on people from the outside, from the top-down process, and then it is amplifying in the same way that Marshall McLuhan talks about, technologies are extensions of who we are. So if we have a value system or a way of interacting with the environment that is actually very disconnected from everything, more about how do we work within a competitive environment where everything is being driven around fear and scarcity. Even the way we advertise and market to people is to make people feel like they're less than or they don't have enough. And so that's what drives the consumer culture. But it also drives maybe the kind of communities that you're part of as well. So if architecture is kind of set up where within the downtown cores, where these steel, glass, and concrete structures were being built, they end up being, taking over the downtown core in a way that now you can't live there very comfortably. So you're driving out to the suburbs to find a more comfortable space to live. But then over time, that kind of paradigm flips. So now our architecture is built around maybe some racial divisions or segregations within the society that are driving wedges between people. And if our architecture is doing that to us, well, what kind of world do we build that reverses that trend and brings us back to, well, what are the materials that we're working with? And for me, as a UX designer, we're dealing with user experience, or I don't like to refer to people as users. That's a little bit too dehumanizing. So I would refer to this as human experience design. And then if our materials are experience, well then how do we better understand a different kind of process of design that actually is around thinking of the whole person, and where do we start with certain values that are going to grow into personal resilience and economic capacity and political agency and ecological harmony.
Exactly, that question, and that I just want to set us out with that question: how to become whole people, to become whole designers, to design for the whole of life, the whole world, and that interiority and exteriority, that sort of non-dual, trans-dual relationship that we have, being both one together and many in our individuality, and learning to be both, to hold the hologram of all the nested ways that we connect, the patterns that connect. We have to transition.
Yeah, that's right.
I had the great joy of introducing another friend and mentor and inspiration to me personally and to our community here, a man named Antony Randall, who gets very well the power of changing people's interiority to change our exteriority. He has been a pioneer in the music industry for many years, and then has come to take those superpowers that he's learned in, big musical acts and the power of music and myth and culture to sort of shape minds. And he's using that all that magic to help to shape the future of the planet by helping raise consciousness about our embeddedness in ecology and our potential as a species to collaborate as a regenerative keystone species. So Antony Randall, good to see you, brother. And you're muted, I think.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
There you are.
I feel like I'm in a sound check right now on a physical stage. Unfortunately, lucky for me, behind me is a picture of the stage actually from San Francisco, 2019. But good morning. I mean, first, I just want to start by saying a big thanks to everyone at Buckminster Fuller Institute and the Design Science Studio for inviting me to be here today. Tom and George and Amanda, Faith, Roxy, Carson, yourself, and Nicholas and Stephen, thank you. And the rest of the BFI team, thank you so much for bringing this amazing, incredible community together. I think that we all have sort of understood the power of community, right? Like, that we can really make change. And I think Bauhaus really speaks to that. And actually, interestingly enough, Carson, as I heard you this morning, and I think back to our meeting you for the first time at the Tower House and how much you inspired me, and how much thinking has changed in me since meeting you at the house. I just want to take a moment of gratitude to you and for all that you do. And I think I want to kick off this morning by sharing a quote from Buckminster Fuller. Am I still coming through there? Okay, yeah. I read this quote actually many years ago, and back then I was in England, and I think it's important to frame this up by saying that he said this in 1983. Which was a very long time ago now in the short span since 83 to now with the evolution that's happened. So as I read this quote, I want you to think about, this was what he wrote in 1983. When I was born, humanity was 95% illiterate. Since I've been born, the population has doubled, and that total population is now 65% literate. That's a gain of 130-fold of literacy. When humanity is primarily illiterate, it needs leaders to understand and get the information and deal with it. When we're at a point where the majority of humans themselves are literate, able to get the information, we're in an entirely new relationship to the universe, where we are at the point where the integrity of the individual counts and not what the political leadership or religious leadership say to do. So I just want you to sit with that for a second. Only integrity is going to account. That was on February the 26th, 1983. That's like a lifetime ago. It was long before the technological evolution of today. And as you guys quite right pointed out, long before our Netflix shows that explain some of the stuff that was going on in Social Dilemma. But he says, we will arrive at a time when integrity counts. And I think here at BFI Institute, it's certainly full of individuals with integrity. And I think that speaks some power to everyone here today. I'd like to take a minute to thank all the speakers as well, and the creators and contributors and special guests for being here today, and also contributing to this amazing community and this amazing moment. I'm also going to take a moment to thank those in attendance that are coming to support BFI, because without our friends and our families and the community that BFI is building, the creators will not be able to create, and they will not be able to bring their magic to the world. And then I'd also like to, more importantly, I want to thank all the creators working hard to create and design a science of an entire decade. As it's your work that's really going to inspire the world, no different to Bauhaus's work. It's your work and your collective coming together that will bring us into a new world. Work that will communicate the vision of Buckminster Fuller, that we're all here on Spaceship Earth. And it is time for us all to step into integrity, into generosity, and help create a world that will work for everyone. So with that being said, as we are here at the nice backdrop of Planet Home, as I'm sitting here, as I said, I can't physically be in the Palace of Fine Arts where this beautiful event took place. We've started to really think about lots of these things over the last few years, and specifically for our physical events as well as our digital. And we start to think about how do we move from eyeballs to actions? You know, like how do we move ourselves from eyeballs to action? You know, and again, a good reference back to what you said earlier. You know, Cambridge Analytica told us that data is like oil, and Tristan Harris confirmed we're in a decade where our intention is now money, which came from Social Dilemma, by the way. It's definitely worth a watch. I'm sure we can all agree that we need a decade where we take good actions for ourselves every day versus living them through the field on our Instagram app. So this year in 2020, the pandemic shifted us into the future of online tools. With a convergence of gaming software, AR, VR, web browsers, online media, a complete shift of online commerce and at-home health and wellness, we just experienced the biggest digital transformation to date. Imagine for a second if you could move people from eyeballs to actions, where instead of being addicted to checking our devices 100 times a day for likes and comments, we get addicted to taking good actions. I think through the world of art, design, and science, we can. I think through this movement here at Buckminster Fuller, just like at the Bauhaus movement in Germany, we can inspire the world. The world did just change, but so did the opportunity to shape the way in which we experience the world around us. Last year, as I mentioned, here in, well, I'm not in San Francisco today, but some of you guys will be. At the Palace of Fine Arts, we built an experiment. It was the first one we did, and it was a very large experience. And that experience really was bringing together cross-cultural from all different walks of life, from artists and musicians to social technologists, economists, environmental experts, and policymakers to really come together and share a vision of the world. So I'd like to share a little video that just explains what that experiment looked like last year. I'm going to switch over to sharing screen. So with my technical expertise of Zoom, how amazing is Zoom, by the way? Isn't it just amazing that we get Zoom these days?
Planet Home, and it's awesome.
I see Planet Home creating a worldwide movement.
We can change the world. Let's have a good Planet Home. This is the inaugural Planet Home gathering here in the Palace of Fine Arts.
And the point of all of this is about giving everyone who steps into these doors the vision of what the future could really look like.
Yeah, this is why, Clem, you already know I'm in the zone for Planet Home, baby.
This one event can change the world.
Planet Home might change the world. We're going to do some good things, and we're trying to save the world.
For us, it's about finding inspirational ways to get people engaged with themselves, each other, and the world. Once you connect, you can care.
Our idea is to get the smartest people in the world together, to collaborate with each other so that we can make sure that we still have a planet to live on for our kids and for their kids.
Excited to be part of the solutionist movement, and I'm cooking a dinner for Planet Home.
I am a solutionist.
People are going to have to save the world if they want a world that's worth living.
Eat less beef, yes. Eat less beef. Don't eat any beef.
It's not a speakeasy.
Everybody has come together to heal our planet home. Being a solutionist is finding ways to cooperate.
It's really nice when I get to come and play anything that has a purpose, that is trying to make the world a better place.
I'm very glad to be here for a good cause.
Just think about one small thing you can do to save our planet Earth. If you're not here, you're missing out. That's why.
The next decade is pivotal. We can turn this around.
I'm here at Planet Home, and it's awesome.
Thank you. So that was a little experiment we did last year at the Palace of Fine Arts. It was a magical journey. Actually, many of the people, many of the fellows at BFI helped lead that charge. They helped shape, create and deliver this world-changing event, which was an experiment of how we can use these life experiences to shift the way we think. So we're doing a calling all solutionist moment, using the power of experience to shift the way that we think about the problems in the world. This was one of the experiences. Roxi, who's here, was actually one of our lead producers and put the entire thing together. And Amanda was actually one of our lead programmers and helped the whole thing come to life with the rest of the Buckminster Fuller, including Tom Chi, who fortunately enough we got to speak. But this was a moment created by two artists that house actually burnt down, and we created this experience for people to actually experience what this was like to go through a fire experience and also attach to it a solution. And these experiences we think were very life-changing.
It's a battle against an unrelenting inferno.
We're trying to show how quickly and devastating a fire can rip through someone's life.
Through the ashes, here we go.
It's based on the Northern California fires last year. The entire installation is 100% recycled and upcycled material. Everything you see is from an upcycled or recycled source.
More than 3,000 firefighters are struggling to contain the fires in what's been described as horrific conditions.
And there's not one solution to wildfires, but there are actionable steps that people can take to help mitigate the occurrence and devastation of these fires. And so we teamed up with the Nature Conservancy to plant 1 billion trees. And we have the ability for people to sign up to plant 1 billion trees.
More than 11,000 homes and buildings are now little more than scorched walls and burned foundations.
Lester is an artist that helped me build this, and his story of growing up was almost lost forever.
I was unfortunate to lose my childhood home. My mom came home with this big box, and she's like, look what we found.
A significant part of your childhood.
Yeah, which I had not visited or seen in more than 25 years.
Beautiful thing, you're at Planet Home with these memories from your home. We're tactile creatures. We need to see it, feel it, know it. So that's, I think, the power of this installation right here.
What we're seeing is an increased frequency of these wildfires.
This is really powerful.
Thank you. So that was one of the experiences that we created last year. And that we think really helps us understand how we can use experiences to shape our future and shape the way that we think about problems and solving problems. So how can we use experience to shape what we do in the world? Can we use experiences? It's no different to Stephen talking about the user experiences that he creates and how using them. And Stephen, thank you for that earlier. Actually, that was a good point that, you know, we shouldn't be really talking about people as users, right? Because I think this is part of the change in tone and change in communication that we are really hoping for, which is we are all part of the solution. We can be part of the solution, or we can be part of the problem, and we are all part of the solution. So we at Planet Home, next year, we will be calling all solutions again for our biggest, boldest plan to date, and even more daring. So we're calling, along with Buckminster Fuller, all creators to align with the Planet Home framework, maybe align some of your inspiration ideas with our index, and maybe use your work to inspire audiences to take and move into action. As you create work around the world, regardless of what your work is, by the way, we want to encourage everyone to think about how your work can align with actions and with solutions, and really think about everything you do from a very systems approach. So at Planet Home, we created a framework that enables us to really think about the planet. You know, very much like Carson's work and the way he thinks about, you know, systems and the way that he talks about systems, whether it's Bauhaus or Buckminster and how they came together. You know, we really thought about it in a similar sort of way from a systems perspective. But what if we could make it easy for everybody to participate? What if we could actually make it easy for everyone to actually add actions to everyday life? What if we could move away from, you know, we can't do to we can do? It's not possible to is possible. So we developed a framework to communicate how we've organized every data and scientifically backed environmental solution that we have found, and try to make it easy and simple for us to communicate how these solutions show up in our life, how they change the way we eat, how they change the way we make, how they change the way we move, and how we change the way we live in equilibrium with the planet. So our data and taxonomy structures allow for an open access point and alignment with all global frameworks, enabling us to not take away from all the hard work being done by all of our friends around the world, but to connect the dots. We know they exist. I mean, if you look at the Drawdown project, it's just amazing. If anyone's not familiar with it, I highly recommend checking it out. But we need to make them part of a system. We can't take away from Drawdown or take away from the SDGs. The goal really here is to bridge gaps and to bring them together. So through our framework, we've actually developed this ability to really simplify the way we eat on the planet, which is how we explore the ecological and biological balance that we must maintain to sustain humanity on this planet that we live on. From eat, you can keep it simple and just think about the way you eat things every day. One less meat meal, one less meat meal will actually have an impact if 1 billion people do it. Or you can get more complex and think about it from food production security, land stewardship, ocean stewardship, and health and wellness. Eat is enabling us really to build day-to-day actions for eat. So work can be inspired around our food systems. We also go into how we make things on the planet, uncover how we work towards sustainability by changing the way we create, use, and dispose of products. Again, you can keep on the top layer, or you can go into sectors where we start to get very heavy on circular economies, green manufacturing, materials science, or regenerative ecosystems. When you think about where we are in circular economies, the fashion industry and the fast fashion industry finally is dying, which is really cool to see that disappear and be replaced by thrift stores and bringing old clothes back. And I think that we'll see hopefully some analog coming back there. So, how do we make things and how do we move forward? We also think about how we move across this amazing planet. How move reveals the cleaner, greener transportation options that will innovate the way we move across the world. We know, and thanks for bringing it up earlier, there will be some unintended consequences, by the way, of all this work. Like, how do we look forward to what is going to happen with batteries in 20 years, 30 years from now? What is the impact of the fact that data centers are using as much power? And if they don't go to start thinking about clean, new fuel systems, the very things we're designing to solve the problem can actually become the problem itself. So you can dig deeper into clean transport, new fuel sources, virtual connections, and ecological exploration. How do we move across the planet and explore it without damaging the planet? And then we get into live. Live reveals the solutions we need to apply to coexist in a better harmony with our priceless environment and in our communities. Again, another great example of Buckminster Fuller Institute and this team here of the community they built. And we talk about sustainable communities and cities, renewable and equitable energy, biodiversity, and atmospheric conditions. So you can do some deep dives into this work. Lots and lots of companies are doing this work. And what we're doing is we're calling all solutionists, we're tapping into technology that engage people, that incentivize them to continue taking actions that help our planet. So that brings us back around to the golden opportunity here, because, we do have technology now. Of course, when Buckminster Fuller wrote that in 1983, we hadn't really seen Moore's law come into full effect. I mean, we were literally at the very beginning of Intel's growth on the chip market. And also we were at the very beginning of the internet. So with the support of, a platform that we're building that we learned a lot from last year on, we kind of really focusing on micro actions on our platform. And we've built some good indicators, so we can use our indicators to align them with some planetary calculators so we can calculate our actions. And we can hopefully empower actions through data and also from data learning. So we really do hope by making it very easy for everybody to take action every day, giving them the information and the research and the data, that we can actually empower everybody to do this work. Through the power of technologies like AI, of course, we're discovering amazing insights. We're combining that with our platform, and we've been really unlocking solutions and the power of people. So that brings us really round to culture solutions and my wrap up today. First, I want to just take a moment really to just say what an honor it is to even be here this morning. This team is a big inspiration for me. Carson, a big inspiration. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for framing this up this morning. Roxi, just your biggest fan, as you know. So thank you so much for working so hard with Amanda and Faith on making this real. And I'm going to close out with a little mantra that I want to leave us all with. Change our mindset, and we can change anything. How we live, eat, make, and move. We have a chance of a lifetime, and it's ours to take. The status quo has been shaken. We need to leave behind how things were done, leave behind old ways of thinking, and we begin to move forward. We need to culture a new journey, culture love, culture values, and culture solutions.
Thank you, Antony. Thank you so much for being here, for everything that you stand for. And also Gabrielle is here with us as well today. Thank you, Gabrielle. I had the honor and pleasure of being connected to you all whenever we built Planet Home, and will forever be changed by that experience. And a lifelong collaborator committed on this mission together. So just wanted to thank you from the bottom of our hearts and my heart that you all have lit a beacon and a torch for so many in the process of, elevating and platforming solutionists, right? And you stand beside that there is not one solution. It is a network of solutions, and it is a whole entire interconnected system that is supporting. And within your ethos that you all have helped share with me and so many creators, it is so fundamental, your belief in the power of shared experience and art and connection to transform, educate, and catalyze change to action. And may our weaving together continue to help these different installations and designers and media and VR and AR and data scientists and all of the work of the creators here and this broader movement weave with actions and direct action, because right now we are in this pivotal time and we cannot lay dormant anymore. So just wanted to share an immense gratitude, and to any of you who are tuning in from the live stream that is currently shared out into the world. We're going to close the live stream and we're going to continue with all of our different attendees who are here with us today, either in Topia or inside of our internal meeting. So we invite you to come and join us for the rest of the day. There's an entire day planned and so many different installations for you to learn more about, and deep, wonderful conversations and performances. There's even a giant compost puppet later and all kinds of wonderful things. So we really hope that you all tune in and come and support and join us on this movement, calling all solutionists and calling us all in as we move forward into this decade together. With courage and community, because it's going to take a lot and it's not an easy time that we're in. So there is so much hope that is grounded in the incredible people who are here today and the community that we're all connected to. So may we take that embodied hope and wonder and move with vigor and in our commitment to making this world work for everyone. So with that, I will we'll cut the stream that's going out, and we will continue on. And I will pass the mic back to Stephen to introduce Rūta and Malü.
Great. Thank you, Roxi, for just highlighting the moment that we're in and how important it is to move everything forward. So I'd love to introduce to you Rūta, Danyte, and Malü Duque on the concept of community as a geometric shape of a cell, inspired by a living systems philosophy. So yeah, in a divided world, how might we grow micro-communities as a natural way to feel togetherness and co-create a regenerative world?
Thank you so much, Stephen. And hello, world. So I'm Rūta. I'm from Lithuania, and my co-creator is Malü.
Hi, everyone. I'm Malü. I'm from Colombia, now living in Argentina.
And our project is called Same Community, because we are all the same. So let me share a screen with you and then start our presentation. Okay, so here we are. So Same as a project was born with a simple question in mind and observing nature. So if in nature everything is connected, so why human world is so divided? And even if we observe on a micro level our human body, and we know from biology, from latest science, that the human is actually an ecosystem of bacteria. So human essentially is a plural, but in our modern world, we focus so much on individualism, but we forget about togetherness. So that's how our project started. Me and Malü met on the internet, and we thought we actually are all the same. We have more in common than we think, and we thought we just need a place such as Same Community.
Well, the co-creators of this project are Rūta and me. Rūta is at the north and at the south of the same world, the same planet. And our vision is to have at least one person from each country, so connect 195 people to start. And inspired by Duque and you and Design Science Studio ideas, we ask ourselves, what's the easiest way to live on the planet Earth? And we definitely believe is copy nature.
So how do we copy nature? Well, first, we observe that there are geometric organic shapes there, which we can copy and bring it into our social life of humans. So with that in mind, we actually notice that me and Malü, even if we are based in different parts of the earth, we are like those cells in nature. We are all the same at the fundamental level. And then like cells are part of larger ecosystems. So our community members, like ourselves, we are part of a larger whole. That's why we started as Same as a community, so that we together as those cells, we could be part of bigger whole. And then just to mention here that as a community, Same is a project within Design Science Studio, so even larger ecosystem, right? And even Design Science Studio is part of a larger ecosystem such as Buckminster Fuller Institute. So it's really interesting to observe that how we go from micro to macro if we just copy geometric organic shapes into our social life of humans. But we don't end here, and then we look further. So what else we can copy from nature? So then we observe that trees and fungi help each other, and then they share resources from mycelium network. So in the same way, we decided to copy interactions and networks as a behavior. And in our community, how it works, it starts with a one-on-one interaction between members when they start to cooperate and help each other. And this behavior then replicates in our community and then forms a robust network. And more so, how else we copy nature? So essentially, we create processes and not products. So like fungi, they create processes and behaviors. So the same, our community, our project, it doesn't create any products like in human world. Every company is all about products, but we instead, we go different direction, natural way, we create processes. And lastly, we observe that there are organic behaviors that we can copy and turn into community rituals. So one of them is a synergy principle that many of you know about. That means that whole is more than its parts. So what that means in our community is that co-creators always add on top. So for example, even different people like myself and Malü, we come from different cultures, have different skill sets, different opinions, but we can still get into that synergy moment and create something bigger from ourselves. Like for example, this project, Same Community. And the same way also our members can share with each other and distribute knowledge and resources through our network and experience more of those synergy moments that together we create something bigger from ourselves. And lastly, feedback loops that we observe in ecosystems. they manifest in our community when interactions between members grow into projects and ideas. So for example, a single conversation between me and Malü that we met actually a month ago on the internet, and single conversation could spark and a feedback loop could spark a project. Who would imagine that? So then the same behavior we replicate in our community when the person perhaps sometimes has just a thought, and that person just needs a feedback from another human, and then that thought turns into a project that creates a bigger whole for everyone.
And also same is a community, but it's a process of templating communities. We spark regenerative micro-communities around the earth, and we engage our members to do that, like local communities, to share global ideas and projects. And how we help our members to create their community projects in their locations. We do this by turning ideas into projects, to found idea partners or request and offer with what they need, to facilitating co-creation between members and sharing community creation guidelines and tech tools. For example, we use a platform called Infinity to register time we spend it helping each other and we spend creating our own projects.
So with that in mind, I would like to thank you for your time, and hopefully we inspired you to observe nature on the meta level and then turn those principles and behaviors that we define in nature into your human life. And we hope that you join us in the same .community on our website. And because we aim to connect at least 195 people who may be invisible now, but together, when they're part of our community, they can exist and co-create as one organism. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi. I think I'm the next person to speak, but is there somebody introducing me, or I just go ahead?
Yes, sorry. I had a little mouse problem. I just, yeah, my mouse died. Sorry. I just realized, so I'm using my trackpad now. So I'm delighted to be able to introduce you Cesar. He's got some amazing ideas about how he's transferring his practice from art to engineering, and I'll let you take it away.
Thanks a lot. I'll share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll also start my timer. I want to make sure I stay within 7 minutes. Okay, so thanks a lot for having me. My name is Cesar Jung-Harada. Thanks a lot for Samantha Supia, who invited me to join this event. I speak on behalf of my communities of Meko Bay, Scoutbots, and University of Hong Kong, where I teach in design and architecture. So because I was asked about art and science, because actually my background is in the arts and design, but now I work mostly in engineering and science. So I'd like to speak a little bit about my journey and also give very tangible example of how to break those boundaries. I like the diagram on the right that shows that arts and science are very similar in the sense that to be a great scientist, you have to be extremely creative. And to be a great artist, you need to know also about technique and technology. And I really see that in our practice, there's no so much boundaries. And sometimes I participate as an artist, sometimes as a scientist, that it doesn't really matter to me. So for example, I just wanted to show, I used to make, oops, I shouldn't have clicked, sorry. I used to make movies, for example, like this one. But for example, I study animation film, and my first job after animation movie making, I actually worked in a civil engineer laboratory in wave energy to capture the energy of waves from the sea. And my background in animation film was really instrumental in the lab because I was the person in charge of analyzing the movements of the machines frame by frame. And so what I've learned in arts and the knowledge of knowing how to make things really helped mathematicians and who didn't necessarily know how to do things, maybe sometimes out of intuition as well. But I'd like to speak about the sense of urgency and give you a tangible example of the technologies that we have developed that are inclusive with our community. So self-sufficiency, I don't think I have to go too deep about this, but I think you all know that we're in a sixth great extinction. So it's very urgent that we develop better ways to work together and develop technologies that can be used by everybody and not destroy the environment. In 2010, the BP oil spill started, and I was part of a team. I was a project leader at MIT on developing a robotic technology to clean up the BP oil spill. So my team were developing robots that would be operating as swarms, and they would be essentially going to clean up the BP oil spill. The project was called Sea Swarm, but personally, it was a really, really cool technology, but it was going to be very expensive. It was going to take a long time to develop, and it was going to be entirely closed source. And so I felt very frustrated because I knew that the people who needed the most this technology would not have access to it. So I moved to the Gulf of Mexico. I lived in New Orleans for two years, and I worked with the activists, work on the front line to actually keep BP accountable and map the oil spill that was destroying the coastline. And I met many people, some of whom have suicided because they lost their job, because their families were broken, because the whole industry was devastated by the oil spill. And working on the front line of environmental devastation, I could see that technology is not about technology. It has deep social and consequences. So after I left MIT, I started developing a new technology, which was a shape-shifting sailing robot. You could see it on the TED website if you want to know more about it. But in a nutshell, I invented a new type of robot which changes shape. So basically, it's a boat that functions sort of like a fish, and you can control the point of sail very well. So you can drag a lot of oil absorbent in a very, very efficient manner. I won't go too deep about the technology, but basically, it's a way to control more oil absorbent that is open source. And because I make this technology open source in 2011, then it attracted a lot of people from all around the world who contributed. Some of them mathematicians and engineers, but some of them also sailors and fishermen, people who are working and directly impacted by the oil spill. We have a lot of documentation on the topic. Because of this, I got into an incubator and sailed around the world to try my technology. So this is the journey I've taken not on a shape-shifting boat, but on a larger ship. And I stopped in all these ports to test this technology and try to see how to bring it to the market. These are two videos. One is from Ghana, where we tested some technology with a fisherman in Ghana. On the right is a hackathon we organized in Morocco with like university students. But anyway, so this brought me to Hong Kong, where I found I used to be based in San Francisco, but when I found that robotics development costs 7 times cheaper in China, then I decided, of course, to move to China, because my investor was asking me, develop this technology as quick as possible. When I came to Hong Kong, I was a bit tired of working in academia, so I worked in primary school actually. But I still wanted to do something along the lines of developing technology to clean the environment. But I also wanted to do something that was relevant. And in Hong Kong, there's terrible plastic pollution. And so I asked my students from age 5 to age 12 years old to develop technologies that would be appropriate. And they developed a robot. Instead of taking the plastic sample from the sea, it would basically take an image from the plastic and send the data. And this is Jane Goodall, who gave us the prize to my students for the best environmental technology. For basically, instead of collecting plastic, we collect the plastic data. Another project that we've done is with WWF. They ask us to track every single stream of water and understand how the pollution travels from the land to the sea. And so we partner with 11 schools, local schools, that are located close to the source of the river. And with this, each of the schools built 10 ocean drifters. And those drifters, basically, we throw them in the river, and they are biodegradable. You can see that actually Danyte was passing by Hong Kong, so he's my mentor as well. And so he helped to prototype this drifter. And it's a young girl who actually suggested that our drifter could be better if it was biomimetic and if it was more like a jellyfish. And so we built the next generation of ocean drifters to be just like jellyfish. And so we measured that we drift in 1 month from Hong Kong to Taiwan, and another month go to Japan. And this is another student of mine. This is just from last week. We built with him a robot to actually capture the plastic in the sea. So this robot that you might see in the newspaper in the next few weeks. So these are the new generations of robots to capture plastic in the Hong Kong harbor. I'll go really quick. Right now, what I'm focusing on is to work with young people again, to develop technologies to map coral reef. So this is 7 minutes. So these are my students. I asked them what is the best way, what is the current like state of the art to map coral reef. And my students suggested to use lasers actually to scan coral reef, like structured light, what you use in normal labs, but underwater. And my student didn't know anything about electronics or coding, but I teach them to hack basically. And so we immediately took apart electronics. I teach them about optics, acoustics, mechanic, machining, and they build a laser quadrat. We took it to the local and like ocean science. So these are my students, and they showed the very first quadrat. And the local scientists were super impressed with this technology. We actually started to map coral reef with the instrument that we've built in a couple of days with my students. 30% of my students were kids with special needs. I think it's very important to say. And we developed this novel technology to map coral reef. And since then, we published this on Instructable. You can find it online. And then 2 years ago, we had a grant. So this one is older students. We had a grant to go to the Philippines. So I took 12 students to the Philippines, and we replaced the divers with a robot. And this is the latest robot from last month. We have one robot with 5 high-resolution camera. We take 36,000 pictures of corals in 1 hour, and then we make high-resolution 2D maps and 3D maps of coral reef. And now we're training an AI to create the largest database of coral reef that's entirely open source. So you'll be able to see that online. Now I teach at university at HKU, and this is my makerspace. I opened a makerspace called Maker Bay, and we have opened 7 branches in Hong Kong. So now we have the largest network of innovation space in the region. We built the first autonomous car, and we work with the homeless, with refugee in the region. And we are opening the first makerspace largest makerspace in Cambodia with the Ministry of Telecommunication in the Q1 of next year. So my point is that there's no point in separating disciplines. We need to take care of everybody, like involve even the children, the people that you would not think about. Use alternative model of funding, crowdfunding, using open hardware to distribute, and use open science and open source. I just wrote an essay on the website I will show at the end, and I'd love to have your feedback of reinventing or creating a new model for the scientific revolution. Also this thing that I call impact innovation that I love to to debate and have other people critique and give me feedback on. So that's the end of my presentation. You can go on makerbay.net to see this essay that I just wrote yesterday, and that's my website. We can see more. And if you want to see this presentation, you can scan this QR code, and I'm gonna link as well in the chat.
Wow. That was amazing. Cesar, thank you for being here.
Thanks.
It's so important to have perspectives like this, global perspectives like this. So really grateful, and also just incredible to hear your story. It's really inspiring and enlivening. Does anyone have any questions for Cesar? He specifically saved a moment for any questions. So I just wanted to give anyone the mic if they wanted to inquire or share any reflections on how that was. Briefly.
Yeah, I'm curious, Cesar. This was a really great presentation. And so there's a lot of children and youth you work with. So I'm just curious what their like overall energy and like voices about these times we're in, these times of change, and all the work and all the cleanup that you're involved in. Like what's the energy that the youth is carrying?
So I'm based in Hong Kong. It's 3 a.m. here. The young people that I see, for example, like the people that are sort of my target and that I imagine would be like the greatest power for change are the young people that I see, for example, at the climate march. In Hong Kong, the climate march was actually really small. The youth climate march was maybe only like 200 people. And there is a sense of, okay, they're willing to go, for example, do cleanup because it's socially acceptable by their peers. But then when they have to do weird stuff like building robots and being in the sea, then sometimes it kind of goes beyond what is acceptable they start to kind of stick out too much. And I think for young people, what I personally observed that was the hardest is to not be ostracized. I think a lot of young people want to do something good, but they are really afraid of the judgment of other young people. Really, that's holding them back. They are afraid to be ridiculous because they're afraid to be looked at like environmental Nazis or something like this, or like weirdos.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a question.
Oh, sure.
You said that you have the kids are capturing the data on the plastic. So is that an ongoing project that they're still capturing that data? And is that global?
Project that is active on the plastic side, if you want to go, is called clearbot.dev. One of my students, because the picture I've showed of the young student, actually some of the students have grown up now and they graduated from university. And so now they're making this into a startup. And so you could see it on their startup. Yeah, so it's clearbot.dev. Yeah. Oh, but my personal active project now is the coral reef robot. And you can see that on makerbay.net, and that's active. I'm not proactively working on the plastic pollution right at the moment, but yeah, if opportunity comes, I'll jump back in.
Cesar, I could just amazing work. Thank you so much. But you said that the children have a hard time thinking that others will think they're kind of strange. Are you doing anything to help make this cool and more normal so that even more kids will want to get involved?
We're trying to be cool. I guess I'm like pretty nerdy and like not Asperger's, but I can be like, really focused on the work that I'm doing at times. I think we're trying to make it cool. Like, I guess like we're putting like cool music on the making of videos that we put out and stuff like that. No, we haven't, to be honest, like we haven't broken that nut. Like that's something that we're struggling. Also, we need the support of adults. Like if the schools, for example, are like supporting it and they're making this part of the curriculum, then all of them have got to do it. And then they see it in the newspaper and then they think, oh, like this nerd is actually like on a newspaper. Oh, he's actually cool and I'm not cool, like doing some other stuff. So I think it's taking time, but yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm sure we have to wrap up, but just real quick, what is the next phase then after you do the mapping of the coral?
Yeah, that was a good question.
Right. So what we found is that mapping coral is hard. It's super hard. The next step for us, we are establishing a partnership with different universities around the world so that they're also willing to share the data, and that takes a bunch of time. But eventually, what we feel would be complementary to what NASA is doing or the NOAA is doing is to have what they call ground truthing, so that we have also like not only the pictures of the coral, but also data about the temperature of the water, acidity, what's happening in the chemistry, turbidity, and to understand like what is causing the coral to die and what makes a coral to survive. And then we can really contribute to research and know like which coral should we replant somewhere, or do we need to like create like some protected area, or and we're quite far from that, to be honest. I feel a couple of years from that, I feel, unless let's work really hard. We'll do our best.
Yeah, synergy, it'll happen.
Right.
Other people will come in and make it happen. Well, again, thank you so much. Amazing work. I look forward to reading your stuff and giving comments.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Cesar. And just feeling the Agora coming to life right now, all these incredible perspectives from, Bucky and Bauhaus to Wyclef Jean and Bill Nye, like doing culture jamming with us. The communities as cells and biomimicry and organizations. And then Cesar, your work with, robotic jellyfish mapping seafloors. Incredible. And just feel the places our minds have just gone together and how much emerges from that, this feedback loops. And the power of the Agora. We're going to take a short break to honor our local biology, and we'll be back in how long? 3 minutes? I think 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Yeah. All right, setting the timer. I'll see you back in 5 minutes, and I'll guide us back in with a little grounding, reflective meditation. I'll see you in 5. Happiness with the prevalence of birdsong. And birdsong is a proxy for the health of ecosystems. Bioacoustics. Give everybody another minute just to come back. And as you come back, I invite you to come back to center. Find a stable seat, stable ground. As you start to come back, you can kind of wiggle in your seat too and sort of feel, don't take center for granted. Maybe test the edges a little bit. Where is center actually? Can you feel it when you find it? Can you feel the difference in your spine stacks? Just so. As you start to find center now, and feel both feet, if you can, flat on the ground. Hands folded together on the thighs. You can feel the way the body naturally wants to triangulate. You feel the feet and the knees up to the hips, the spine, the shoulders. Can you feel the tetrahedrons naturally forming in our own skeletons, grounding us with the earth? Feeling us pulled in, pulled home, held in the earth's gravity, held in this liminal space between centripetal and centrifugal forces. Remarkable how centered and still it can feel here in our own axis mundi, despite spinning at 1,000 miles an hour in rotation around the earth, while our earth spins at 67,000 miles an hour around the sun, while the sun and us and our other planetary friends spin at 490,000 miles an hour around our galactic core. And yet, it's still here. It's stable here. Feeling if your palms are touching, see if you can feel your heartbeat for a moment. You feel the warmth and beat of your heart, a heart that began beating while you were in vitro, while you were in your mother's womb, beat into being by her heart that began beating in her mother's womb, that began beating in her mother's womb. And in this heartbeat now, can you feel your connection to the web of life? All our cousins out here, birds and trees, bacteria. And in this breath, just feeling in each breath, this communion that we make with the lungs of the earth, with the trees, with the forest, with the bacteria and the seas, breathing with us. We take Gaia's lungs into our own. All right, union now. Who's touching what a miracle it is to be here, to exist, to share this consciousness, to share this moment. To have friends like this, community like this, tools and skills and perspectives like these. Miracle of miracles. Thank you for your presence. Roxi, do we take it away?
Thank you, Carson. So, so good to have everyone here together. And we're about to enter another phase of the conversations in Agora. A phase where we're going to explore some deep questions, and questions that are just very present And in this time where we're in a culture that is obsessed with progress, and progress has been a problem in many ways, despite the beauty that it has also brought to this world. And so in these dichotomies that we're embedded within as we're working to make this world that is equitable and just together, there's always an important practice that we want to do our best to not only acknowledge, but try to embed more into our work, which is a time for reflection and a time to really kind of dig deep. And so that's what this next little session is about. And it's recognized, it's a privilege to get to be in a space where we're going into inquiry, where we're trying to figure out how to best make time for integration. And in this time and this theme of today, dissolve and bloom, right? What is it that we are releasing as we're coming together as one connected family? It's a beautiful time that we can spend together. And so we will have 3 presenters during this time. Maxinne Leighton, who is bringing extensive experience with the built environment, architecture, urban design, and how we respond to crises. At Antioch University, she completed a PhD program in leadership and change, studying post-disaster recovery, climate impactful events, design profession, radical socioeconomic disparity. Akiko Ogawa, who is one of the artists and creators in the Design Science Studio and the Living Systems Collaboratory, is connecting human communities around the preservation of knowledge and wisdom by learning from the information systems of nature embodied by seeds, exploring death and composting as a nutrient-rich foundation for new forms of life. And Stephen Bao, one of our hosts today, and also a member of the Design Science Studio, is exploring the concept of design for resilience, as he told you, right? The design for resilience starts with the assumption that things will go wrong and engages in a process of anticipating the unintended consequences through observation to build empathy, and he finds inspiration from nature to solve challenging problems. So as I pass the mic and we go into this next session, I want to just thank you all for coming to be a part of this experience. I spent some time wandering around in between the sessions, and there's so much happening across the world inside of Utopia. There's a vision train that is alive, and there's, I think, like 12 artists that are creating there, and a workshop from Dave Zabosky, one of the original animators for Disney, many of our Disney classics, along with Amanda Sage. So we invite you to also explore that world throughout the day. And let's take this time and go into inquiry. Thank you all for being here, and welcome.
Thank you, Roxy. Yeah, just honored to be able to meet with Maxinne and Kiki, who are, we're exploring the theme of death and what we just came, the experience of contemplation that Carson brought us through is realizing the gravity of our situation and so many things going wrong all at the same time. And that leads us to the question of, well, how do we deal with our own mortality? What do we do with this idea of death, where it seems just, it is so so real in this situation that we're all in, where we're in this state of agoraphobia, trying to deal with this fear of, we don't want to be involved in causing someone else's death, but we also want to make sure that we're protecting our loved ones as well. So what do we do in this place that feels very helpless? And it's almost like the social systems that we've designed around us actually do create that sense of helplessness. But what this moment calls to is to learn how we process and cope with the passing of so much precious life, and how can we preserve the lives that that are so crucial for the wisdom that we need to move forward into the future. So I'd love to welcome both Maxine and Kiki into this exploration of how we think about where our own practice in design and science and other areas, yeah, Maxine, you were just expressing to me just how you have been so involved in architecture, urban design, and the built environment, but also very intimately connected to the process of death through your hospice work. And I'd love to hear how those things came together.
Yes, thank you. First, I just want to thank everyone at BFI for welcoming me to the BFI family. I'm relatively new to this community. And Stephen, I want to thank you for opening this journey for me. It's really pushed me to different edges and helped me to refocus some of my own thinking. So I want to thank you for that. I would say that I've been studying death for a long time. It found me early on in life. And I grew up in the housing projects in Coney Island, which are housing estates, an economically challenged community. And the buildings themselves, the way they were built, while they were modeled out of the Corbusier style of design, it kind of lost the heart and soul of Corbusier. And what you were left with buildings that all looked alike, no street life, and a deadness. However, outside those buildings was the ocean. And it was there where life and vigor and possibility and a connection to Creator was really possible. So I grew up holding those two paradoxes. And that paradox really took me through my life on journeys about death and about what brings life and death, and how do you grow from both of those. So whether I was working in a hospice or I was on the ground in the former Yugoslavia, or more recently working post Superstorm Sandy, there's a gift of paradox in really looking at death. And there's a gift of paradox between art and science, between architecture and engineering, and between life and death. It's holding together the ability to hold a paradox of seemingly contradictory truths with the objective of finding a greater truth. And that's been what has really fueled me on this journey and given me so many insights. Working in a hospice, I felt very much like a midwife in the sense that I was honoring the journey of the person who was dying. Similarly, going in on the ground after a disaster, you need to be present with the people who have just experienced a disaster, who have experienced loss, are in a state of trauma, and to be able to hold the space for them so they can experience what they're experiencing, but also to know that you know what your own narrative is going on inside of you, but also being able to listen to their narrative and to bridge the gap. Again, it's the paradox between the built environment and nature, between life and death, between the internal and the external. So there's been an exploration for me around this subject of how do you suspend judgment? And to go back to the hospice or being on the ground after Sandy or Katrina, how do you suspend judgment when you're facing face to face and heart to heart with someone who's going through a big transition? How do you explore the realness of the lived experience? How do you look at what's apparent and invisible that lies beyond what is seemingly conclusive? And how do you stand in a space where, again, you're allowing for the narrative of others, and you're also allowing for dignity, and you're allowing for feeling? As was shown in Planet Home earlier, I think part of the key to all this is the ability to feel and to create a space and a conversation and a narrative where people are allowed to feel and experience what's really going on. I think that kind of conversation is really important to the time ahead. When we look at the times that we're in now and so much of the built environment, as Stephen talked about, agoraphobia, but also within the architecture and engineering field right now, in the middle of this pandemic, it's been incredibly impacted, particularly with engineering in terms of air quality and airflow. And so it brings together that even the air we're breathing, whether we're outside or inside, is the air of life or the air of death. And that's very much what you're meeting when you're sitting at the bedside of someone who's passing. There's also a miracle in that, which is there is the passing to a place of rebirth. And that's a very serious lived experience when, if you've ever had the privilege to sit with people who are dying, there is this passage, and part of the passage is, and similar to what happens after a disaster in the built and the natural world, there is the grief of leaving the only home you've known in this body. And for most people I've sat with, you'll see there's a moment where the recognition that you're losing your best friend, which has been your body, and a mourning of that, and a valuing and a deep appreciation and love in that moment. And the hospice I worked in was an AIDS hospice. And so the impact on the body and the ravages of the body and of the spirit, particularly for those who were dying alone, was incredibly profound. But yet I would see this in person after person. And then there would come a moment where there was a transition and there was a knowingness and a letting go. And it's almost like the letting go from the physical form, not only into spirit, but what I would, as those of us living on the ground, is really embracing and understanding nature. Because all of these things, nature is a mirror of all this. She's developed her world based on these very things, where life and death is just part of her system, just as it is ours. So that's part of what I've taken away and really worked to bring into the work I'm doing post-disaster in recovery, as well as trying to have impacts on designers and engineers to really look at their work and to look at their work in the context of community. If there are more shifts in the design profession, first of all, where it is a more inclusive profession with more women, people of color, different economic backgrounds, because so much of design right now is based on the polemics that you've learned in school, and there isn't enough broad base of personal experience that one could bring to the design. And that's very important. And educating children at all economic levels is part of breaking that mold. But it's also really learning to listen to communities. There is an expression after Katrina, which was, there were two disasters after Katrina. One was the event, the hurricane, and the second one was all the design professionals who came to New Orleans and decided that they had the solutions. And that was the second disaster, because what was really needed was a process of listening and respecting and acknowledging that while a design professional may hold certain skills, that it's the people within the community who are living their lives within that environment that know what's right, what's best, and need to have voice and give expression. So that is something that I think is very critical. And for a lot of design professionals, opening up to that is standing in their own kind of paradox and dilemma.
Wow, thank you so much, Maxine, for your story. That was really touching. Yeah, I think, Stephen, is it okay if I kind of flow through the conversation? Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting that you were touching on the themes of death. I've personally, my art has mostly been, well, I'm a painter, and a lot of my work that I've been kind of, my practice is all about kind of entering the portal and envisioning kind of new kind of visions for the world. And I've been very much into my kind of practice of entering new dimensions and really exploring kind of new ways of understanding the world. And so my art is very much inspired by the Renaissance period and how romanticists used to paint very kind of like sublime and exaltations of very quite like visionary images of the euphoric, and to me that was quite a significant theme in my work as well. And so the work that I do at the moment is very different to my kind of like visual artwork in terms of my paintings and drawings, but a lot of the themes that were kind of taken from my paintings were to do with kind of like entering the portal and really kind of seeing various landscapes within these images. And so the themes that I bring into my work right now in terms of seeds is really understanding how seeds are basically taken in, and the ideas of regeneration are really kind of explored. So my work is about basically planting seeds for ecosystem restoration and sharing the indigenous wisdom for reconnecting with the land and healing the earth from industrial extraction, and like really creating new incentives and pathways to share seeds and reconnect with the earth. So that's the kind of like project that I wish to kind of explore with the themes of death as well. How cycles of life basically should be, in a way, the new narratives of the Regenaissance, if that makes sense. So those are the kind of themes that that I would like to kind of talk about today, if everyone's happy to proceed.
Yeah, certainly. Sorry, I was having a little trouble with my mute button. I was getting a spinning beach ball because I was in Topia, so I had to close the window. Yeah. Yeah, so what I'm really feeling about what Maxine was just sharing about how we honor what has come before, but then allow. One of the things that comes to mind is a conversation that we were listening to earlier this week as part of the Design Science Studio, last week. We were listening to Lynn Twist, and I know, Maxine, you have a definite affinity towards to Lynn and her work with the Hunger Project and everything that she was inspired by Bucky to do. So she was talking about how we are showing respect to everything that has come before that has brought us to this place where we have so much technology. And even Bucky was recognizing, well, we maybe needed to go through a process of understanding how do we arrive at these technologies, even if it came through some really questionable means, whether it's building through a military industrial complex or through the creation of this kind of oppressive economic system. But what we're coming to is a realization of, well, this puts us in a state of responsibility for, we recognize that something is passing whether it's a fossil fuel industry that needs to maybe pass on into the past, and something else is being birthed into the future. And what I find through what both of you are talking about is this sense of a foundation of, things can be composted, and we can respect what brought that life to being and how that is passing. But then that composting then becomes the substrate for the new life that comes. So what you're doing with the Hypergroove Collective and the Seed Share project is really an expression of how we're taking what has been going wrong from the past, or is passing away, and then moving on that foundation towards a new way of thinking about the future. So even what we've been expressing through some of the earlier talks, even about working with the younger generation, how they become the seeds of where we're going to go with this new information or new consciousness that we're aware of. So it becomes this hospicing of the old and a birthing of new life into the future.
Stephen, if I can just for a moment, I just wanted to make reference to what you were saying, but also a connection I really felt, Kiki, after your presentation, that there's a wonderfully shamanic and indigenous spirit in the work that you're doing. And we talk a lot in terms of the issues around climate change and disaster, and the all of the colonial mindset and systemic racism and how it's playing out. And so what I was reminded of in looking at your work is that as we continue to develop and really investigate and reflect on this conversation, that it's an opportunity, that paradox between life and death, or what you were showing through your work, it's an opportunity to really return to the earth and the indigenous practices, as well as land acknowledgement. I mean, my dream would be that no one in this country or across the world starts any new building or restoration project without doing an acknowledgement to the land that that building is on. To begin to start to have a consciousness about where we're standing and who stood there before, which goes to what you're talking about, is the intergenerational aspect, that it really is about planting seeds for the generations ahead. And as someone, from my perspective at this point in my life, I see myself as a stand and a bridge to help those who are coming after me. There's a wonderful peace builder named John Paul Lederach, and he says something in one of his books that we should all see our lives as spanning 200 years, and to think back, who is the first person who held you when you were born? When was that person born? And now in your life today, who is the youngest person you've held in your arms? And what will the lifespan of that building be? And that's the bridge and the energy between what has come before and what will come after. So I'm bringing that up because, Kiki, those were some of my reflections after seeing your work.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yes, so the idea is very much aligned with the Indigenous kind of narrative of reconnecting with the land, and the process of matriation as well. And Seed Share is basically kind of focused on enabling such communities to cross-pollinate and swap seeds locally, as well as to share the information and wisdom globally with other communities around the world. And I like to kind of refer to this geometry when I think about understanding the geometry of networks and how information travels. And at the moment, corporate structures operate from a top down, but bottom up grassroots communities like indigenous seed saving communities go through this process of bottom up, where together with these kind of top-down structures, but also creating that space for bottom-up self-organization, you get this kind of circular and very causal and interconnected solution. And that's kind of what I would like to explore, is also that idea of like biomimetic design in understanding how ecosystems work and how these collectively organize with one another. So the Hive kind of platform idea was inspired by how agents basically come together to share resources and actually build structures that facilitate this process of intelligent co-organizing. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome. Stephen, have we lost you?
Yeah, I think we've lost Stephen.
Stephen. Well,
but maybe.
Go ahead, please, Kiki.
Oh no, but I think I would like to ask you as well, with your experience in working in the hospice. Mm-hmm. What did you kind of, how did you feel when you were, how did you feel about the narratives that were kind of building as well when you were inside that moment and experiencing those?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's very deep, yeah.
It's very deep. It was, I had so much of what was going on within my own self. And so my own narrative was loud. And so it was a process of honoring the narrative happening within me, but also acknowledging that this was not my story. This was their story. And I was being given the privilege to sit there and hold enough space so that they could listen to their own story and experience what they needed to. But it was a similar experience I had when I was interviewing people for my dissertation. I had such strong feelings about so many different things, and that narrative was running through me, and that narrative was the fuel and the fire that brought me there. However, I had to just get into a place where I had to let that just flow through me and just be present for what was right in front of me. So I had to stay out of the way. And it taught me a lot about what it was to really witness someone. And the narratives changed. And sometime within the narrative, you would start to learn, as working in hospice, where the way that there was, you could hear an ask, you could feel an ask, and sometimes it was in a word. And it was then you would, like a midwife, you would step in and ask some questions, or you would say something that might resonate for that person. And so that was part of the process, very much so. And one particular instant that has always stayed with me, because it was, the hospice was in the former St. Vincent's Hospital in Greenwich Village, and it was run by these extraordinary kick-ass nuns. I mean, they were fierce, these women. And we were around the bedside of this young man who was really struggling and had been abandoned by his family and was really going through his own process in passing and coming to a place of peace and needing very much to feel loved and held. And when he passed, there was, the nuns would always open the window, no matter if it was summer, winter, they would open the window. And in this particular time, there was no breeze. It was a hot summer night. And the moment he took his last breath, this breeze went through the room and went out the window. And it was just an extraordinary moment, again, of standing in the paradox of seeing this body lying there in front of you, yet you knew that his spirit had left and you could feel it.
Right. Yeah.
So it's also being in a place of listening and suspending judgment and being present in the moment. Just as I would see with your art, you could see that you're incredibly, based on what's there, that you're very present and in the moment and allowing other things to come in and have an impact on you. And it's kind of that same place when you're creating. When you're creating, it's the same place between art and science. It's the same place between life and death, between the built environment and the natural world. It's that space. It's the breath between the musical notes.
Yeah, I love that idea of the paradox as well, of like being present and really embodying. And you're right, with my paintings as well, it's that cultivating that creative energy, but at the same time, it's the paradox of that kind of death and continuous transformation.
And I don't know if you find this, but I find this when I'm writing, that there is a flow of the creative, and there's this incredible joy and flow of the creative. And then it's, well, how do you allow it to take its form so that it could then have its own trajectory? And while you may be its guide, ultimately what happens at some point in the process is you're not its guide, it's your guide. And the same could be said with sitting at the side of someone in a hospice. You may have initially been said, you're their guide, but I could tell you that relationship changed. And for everyone that I sat with, they really became my guide and my teacher. So it's allowing for those different roles to happen. And that gets you out of the kind of patriarchal system and gets you into more of the feminine system. And I don't mean that to be pejorative, because men and women hold both. So yeah.
Yeah, so beautiful. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Sorry, Roxi, how are we doing for time at
the
moment?
I have no, I'm
Stephen. Yeah. Haven't been keeping track.
Yeah, neither have I.
Yeah, we've lost Stephen, but I think we can transition into the next speakers.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that.
Yes, I really did too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Maxine and Kiki.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
In this virtual world that we are in. Yeah, thank you for such a rich and beautiful dialogue. The next conversation that we have scheduled is with two of our creators in the studio who are both doing massive and incredible projects. Olivia, could you please teach me how to say your last name?
Say Olivia, it's fine, please.
Olivia. Perfect. Olivia and Julian. So Olivia is imagining new environments to offer space and community for deep rejuvenation, artistic innovation, co-creative collaboration, and personal development, professional advancement, and heart-to-heart connection, creating the Alchemy Center. And I've just been amazed at the weaving that you've been doing throughout the Design Science Studio and just the force that you are in the world. And Julian, who's responsible for expanding the way we view and interact with the planet through the Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast, which is full of episodes that interview artists and industry leaders and philanthropreneurs in the planet's regenerative movement. You are both such an inspiration, and we are so lucky to be on this journey with you. Welcome, and we're excited to embark on this conversation that you all will lead.
Thanks, Roxy.
Thank you, Roxy.
I'm gonna like try to frame this a little bit. Well, first of all, I was not expecting to have such a deep conversation, hearing such a deep conversation about death and that process of, going back to source energy. So that was really touching. Thank you guys. Wow. And it really sparked a lot of thoughts and questions because what we were talking about now, me and Julian, is life topic theme. So it's like the opposite, or maybe the same, who knows. there was a few things that the both of us felt really compelled to share our insights on, which is hopefully ending with in a conversation about planetary leadership. And when we look at planetary leadership, I believe, and you may agree, that we all have different jobs in this movement on this planet, just like, you know, cells have different little jobs that they're doing and headed towards. And one of the, there's many people that are creating ideas and harvesting them and bringing them into the shared consciousness. And then there's also those people that take those ideas, harvest them, and put those seeds into different areas. And I believe that's one of my jobs. I'm like a seed collector. I want to like see what inspires me, and where I see that somebody is speaking and channeling something that's really important and for all of us, to hear. And one of the projects that I've been so passionate about for the last years, and especially since this pandemic started, was to bring the Alchemy Center forward, which is a mini tiny seed of bringing people together and showcasing their really their power for a larger community to come together and become inspired, and most importantly, being allowed and permitted to be creative, which we think we are permitted to be creative, but I want to really challenge us to think beyond what's really possible. So how do we allow ourselves to be creative? How do we hold space for that? And how do we hold space for that in a non-judgmental space? So that's really what the Alchemy Center is all about. This is something that you guys can also see in Topia. I hope you can give it a peek. And I believe that those seeds need to be planted all over the world with intention. And I know that is something that Julian has been really amazing in, then collecting seeds and planting them in different environments, and especially bringing seeds into environments where there are no such seeds yet. So I was hoping Julian could maybe, or both of us could chat a little bit more about
let's do it.
How that looks like. How do you put a seed in a pot, and how do you make it grow so we can all eat apples later?
Talking about seeds, baby.
It's really awesome how you're setting me up for that sprouting seed conversation. You know, honestly, I think, so again, first of all, thank you all for being here. It is a pleasure to share space with all of you and continuously do so with everyone in the Design Science studio. A big thank you to you all. I think for seeds to grow, we need fertile soil. And something that, you know, in our communities, in echo chambers, and, you know, you all can check in if what I'm sharing is true for you, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think we often see the old and dying paradigm as part of the problem. But really, in an ecology and in a regenerative cycle, that old system is the fertile soil for the new seeds to sprout. And so, Maxinne, I was really inspired by what you shared about, you know, the hospicing kind of experience, because really, at large, we're witnessing and hospicing the dying systems. Mm-hmm. And that's a fundamental and essential and very pragmatic reality, that if we accept that, now suddenly everything becomes compost, and everything becomes, you know, an opportunity for next seeds to grow. And so then our job becomes being that birth doula for what wants to emerge. And I think all of us here, you know, we're already stewarding perspectives, art, insights, entrepreneurship for forward sprouting. But I think on that note, first, I want to just acknowledge that, like, where we come from, even though it doesn't look pretty and it needs a lot of change, is the fertile ground of tomorrow. And so, you know, thanks for that introduction, Olivia and Roxi, about Green Planet, Blue Planet, and the podcast I host. I really started that journey with a frustration about the doom and gloom about the tomorrow, which really comes from the frustration that people have about the yesterday, right? Like, that dying system is frustrating people. It's frustrating us. It's frustrating us that it's still there. But I think an important part of, you know, Bucky's quote that we need to create systems that make the old systems obsolete is to understand that in that obsolescence, it turns into compost, it turns into soil. And so the seeds that we're planting are most likely to sprout into life when they can root into that old system. And then that's really how I interpret my role at this moment, is both to give an ear and create space and host conversations about, you know, this regenaissance that's happening in this decade. And it's really happening because of people like you, because of people like all of us. And it's up to us to continue to make this happen every day. And at the same time, you know, maybe we're hundreds of thousands, maybe we're a million people, but there's hundreds of millions of people, I guarantee you, hundreds of millions of people who are craving for new things to emerge, but they're just not as courageous as all of us are in this call right now. And so what they need is they need this guidance for people like us to invite the dying system into the dying conversation. I'm going to pass it back to you, Olivia, before I rant on into the abyss here.
I want to take you guys in a little, thank you, Julian. I want to respond to that by taking us into a little image. I believe that before this pandemic, we've been fostering a culture of monocultures. Like, we know that's really true for all, like, agriculture all over the world. And it's also true in the way we live and where we live and what bubbles we're part of. And especially what, you know, our political stances are. And I believe that what's become so clear in recent years is that that really isn't working, and it's making us really, it's sucking the life out of us, and it's literally taking lives too. And this pandemic, you know, having the opportunity to go back into the inner and find those little greenhouses, which I believe the Design Science Studio is a safe greenhouse for people like us to go, oh, hey, let's grow our ideas. But then once we are done with the greenhouse period, we need to get out into the world and bring those ideas into the forefront and break down, like, move away from monocultures, which means, I think, for all of us to have the courage to talk to people that we don't agree with and talking to them in a regenerative way. And I believe this is very challenging in so many different ways for all of us. And one of the biggest challenges, I believe, is to especially invite the corporate sector into that conversation, and to invite the institutions that hold the power in our world into these conversations, to again move away from the monoculture approach, because we could all go back into, well, let's just hang out with ourselves and foster what we want to see, but then ultimately we're just continuing to build little islands. So how do we build those bridges? And I believe that, you know, and you can probably speak to that too, Julian, how do we engage, for example, the institutions of power in these conversations in an inviting way to enable all of us to grow and to grow a big forest of really cool trees. How is that going for you, Julian?
Yeah, I like what you're saying. I think what you're speaking about is like embodying and living our actual diversity. So like one piece is the reconciliation of what went wrong about diversity in the past. But then the next question is, how do we now step forward and embody that, so that everyone here and everyone who is, you know, inspired and turned on and tapped in finds what's their true unique thing to express. And also based on what your unique thing to express is, finds these incubators where you're getting inspired. And usually we don't get inspired by just hearing the same opinions over and over, but we get inspired by a variety of that. And so one of the ways how that's happening in my life, it's very interesting. You know, I kind of identify a bit as a global chameleon, you know, having lived on different continents and living in Canada now, or you know, First Nations territory, really, having grown up in Germany. And so this is something that had been inherent in me as a human. And then in this year, what started to happen is I was approached by a venture capital think tank. And at first I was like, what's that about? Interesting. Well, maybe that's an opportunity. And so I looked at it, and I felt deeply honored, honestly, once I looked a little deeper. The name of the venture capital think tank is called Planet Positive Ventures. I'm going to drop a link in the chat as well. And now we're 20 partners over 9 countries with a very corporate and, like, you know, Switzerland and New York kind of centric team of people. And I say that with a chuckle because, as you said, Olivia, that's where a lot of the power in our current world is kind of anchored in, you know, the banking system and kind of the UN and nation state system. And I don't really agree with that structure, and I would totally do it differently if I could, but it's just not exactly how it works, that I alone get to make up how it will change. And so going into that dialogue space, hosting the space for that, and realizing ultimately we're all humans following either the existing rules or creating new rules as artists and entrepreneurs. And so, you know, the area of focus that I really relate with Planet Positive Ventures is that we're making space for companies and initiatives and projects that are seeking funding to meet those people who have funds and investors that actually want to invest into a positive world. So a world where our economy is in right relationship with thriving ecosystems. And really, like if we look at topics like climate change, which I prefer to call the Great Pollution, when we look at the Great Pollution, I mean, there are some really pressing needs that need these solutions to come most likely from an economic sector. I'm not a fan of solving everything through businesses and economy because there's a lot of culture that has to be lived and played in. But you know, the world most people come from, especially older generations, is very much anchored in this business world, in this structural world. And so making the space to allow this space, and then also making the space for millions of dollars to change sides is, I think, a very important bridge to make. And there's a statistic I want to share, and I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with this, but within the next decade, there are estimated about $30 trillion changing hands from the baby boomer generation into the millennial generation or younger. And, you know, I've had the honor and the pleasure to sit with some of the, you know, the heirs of really big family offices and like, you know, infamous families who own a lot of money. And most of the younger generations, they would fit really well into a conversation like this, you know, where the question is, what are we doing with this money that actually allows us to create change? And the problem for the investment world and the corporate world is, how do we verify that these projects are real and not just a bunch of kids dreaming of a better world? And so just to come to a point there, I think the important piece is to open this conversation. And so for all of you, you know, you might have a different background than me or a different role to play, a different bridge to be. I think it's curious to ask ourselves these deeper questions, like, how can I be part of creating more trust in the world? How can I be part of creating something that is a lasting change and more than just like a firework for myself, you know? And so that's what ultimately made me say yes to Planet Positive Ventures.
I so agree. And I also want to point out that change, it's such a daunting word. And I think a lot of us, and myself included, is like, oh my God, it's so many people to talk to. But often it is that one conversation with somebody that is in my mind, maybe super square, and I can open their mind up to a new idea and a new thought. And I believe, and they will do that too to me, because I have assumptions that may prove wrong. And it starts with those really simple conversations. And that alone is the biggest change that I believe we can make. And anything beyond that, bonus points. But again, I think we need to move on a really grounded, from a really grounded place of it's achievable. You don't have to be on a massive stage giving a TED talk that 10 million people watch. It really starts with seeds. And that's this decentralized idea of nature and mycelium networks and forests and how this whole planet works. It's not one big, like the whole, every little part is part of the big whole. It's not that there's one central piece that organizes everything. It really is the entirety of the system that makes the decisions. And what you said, with kind of integrating the venture capitalists and the corporate world, and those are areas that some of us may not be very comfortable in. But similar to how we face our own demons, by hopefully giving them a hug and loving them, because they're ultimately a neglected part of ourselves. I hope that we can at least have an open mind when we engage groups that that feel really toxic to us, but without this kind of icky phase of like, let's move through it, let's face it, let's get really deep on where we would disagree on and also fight about it. We can really move into a healthier space of let's put on the table, and then how can we now solve this together? Because like we talked about it at the beginning, we all have different jobs in this big ant colony of humans, and we all do different things. And if we can, as artists, as visionaries, bring in the ideas that we hope bring us forward as a society, and inviting those that have accumulated the tools and resources to bring this stuff forward, if we can find a shared language here on how to make something that works for 100% of life, I believe we can really make the changes that we want to see. And to bring it a little bit back to what I'm working on, the Alchemy Center, one of the key, really one of the first ideas that sparked me coming up and designing this place a few years ago was the desire to create a space that works for people from all kinds of backgrounds. So inviting the corporate sector and inviting artists and inviting people in that do not usually have access to those places, inviting in people that have ideas but no resources, and creating an environment where we can all come together around a similar-ish idea, and creating a space that is inviting for that was really the goal of the Alchemy Center. And it's using a specific framework to do so. And I just posted a link in the chat. You're welcome to check it out or go to the installation Utopia and see it yourself. But it's really about creating different kind of areas that are very relatable, like a library or a restaurant or a tea house, where we are invited through a specific program to all come together. And that's really what the Alchemy Center is all about. And I know that there's so many more places that have the same dream of going beyond the divide. Yeah. And then how does that translate to moving that to a planetary level is my question.
Yeah, that's a really curious question. I think, honestly, I think the times of trying to figure out everything before it happens is part of the old paradigms problem. So what you're saying there, that the Alchemy Center is one of the embodiments of this dream, and this dream, as many people are feeling that. That's something that become very lucid and aware for me the last decade, the last 10 years, that a lot of these dreams and things I'm seeing, they're like in the grid of the earth vision that many of us are seeing. All it takes is extended states of meditation or nature time or psychedelic exploration, and you come back with these seeds that, happens to be your friend over there sees something similar, maybe different, but similar. And so going into these dreams, and here we're seeing the Alchemy Center in Utopia right now. Thanks, Roxi, for sharing it. Going into these dreams and showing up all the way, I think, is a very important piece of this equation.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, Julian. And it speaks to the same idea of the mycelium network, right? We don't need one or two people to lead this. It's actually something we all have together. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So we're proof it's real. So I believe there's so much hope, honestly, and all of us being able to make a really positive change, and that I'm super pumped. I don't know about you guys, but I think it's going to be really, I think something to remember is it'll get really dirty, and it's not always going to be pretty. I was just talking to somebody about how Hollywood really hasn't promoted a healthy way of looking at life, but we're so influenced by the stories that we hear and all these hero stories that are really important and very valid, but what we can't forget is that it'll get really difficult, and we have to get dirty and willing to stick through the difficult times, and that on its own is really beautiful too. And that is also relating to how we face death. How do we face it with more grace, and how do we also face the obstacles that we may encounter in birthing this new future, which birth really hurts, I heard. How do we step into that with grace, and also being okay with the discomfort? And I think that is so important.
I think what you're mentioning there, Olivia, is one of the key skills of actual leadership. So if we're going to take it to the topic of leadership for a second, I think resilience in this time right now is key number one, because we have to look at a lot of really uncomfortable truths about the past and reconciling them. One thing that's come really clear for me after interviewing over 260 people in the Green Planet, Blue Planet journey so far is that, this environmentalist ideal to not leave a footprint on planet Earth, there's something about that narrative that doesn't really fully work for me at this point. It's really more about learning that as a keystone species, we're here to understand what is our, you know, rightful or graceful, maybe that's a better word. What's our graceful footprint to leave on planet Earth? And as we're understanding that, you know, what's really there is a question that can guide us. And so for me, the leaders of this world that still, you know, operate, you know, guide countries or nation states, they often ask really, really dumb questions. You know, it's a personal opinion, and maybe some of you would see it similarly. And I think we can measure leadership by the amount of action people take while opening a question that they might not be able to answer themselves. So that questions like, what is a healthy planet? What is a planet that works for everyone? Can be in our shared conscious, in our shared psyche for, you know, for longer than election cycles. And there's a lot of work to do until we get there. But I think with questions, we can start this process in a way that previous generations haven't done so far.
And to touch on that for just a second, I read the book Sapiens by Harari a couple years ago, and that really blew my mind. And one of the things that stood out to me was he's talking about how we are trying to go back to like, what's the original state of the planet? There is no original state of the planet. Like when we try to go back to how it was, that was just the way it was at a particular moment in time, and before that was a different state. So we are trying to kind of race back into this idea of purity. And I think that is coming from this inherent belief that we're not natural, but we are a product of this planet, thus we are also nature. And I think reintegrating that and moving through the planet respectfully, without trying to, just kind of go to some sort of ideal that we have in our minds, I think we're chasing something that isn't there. And we're losing the opportunity that's in front of us of treating the planet respectfully with humility and, just the willingness to be really small. And I think that is something that I have learned through just traveling out into nature, like the joy of being small and tiny, and also respecting the traces I leave, but also loving those traces that I leave, because that's me, because that is just another beautiful testament to that we're all alive. And what a miracle is that. I know we're pretty close to having to wrap. I'm curious if anyone has any questions in this group here before we hand it back to Roxi.
Roxi, please do speak up if you have a question. Okay, I think there are no questions from the group right now. I wanted to say thank you to Olivia and Julian for being the seeds of change that need to take place, and being such a strong voice for the studio and the work that you're both doing in the world. So much gratitude for you both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all these insights. And I love how the theme that we wanted to bring to this part of the conversation was just how life-giving all of these new ideas can be, and how we can weave that kind of magic of the Alchemy Center and all the possibilities into what does the future look like for a world that works for 100% of life. And that's where we want to lead into what comes next, where we have some amazing people coming together to share about the Buckminster Fuller Institute and the Living Systems Collaboratory, and these amazing people who have had connections with Bucky through the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And so Bonnie DeVarco is an interdisciplinary researcher, writer, curator, and a distinguished visiting scholar with a MediaX research network at Stanford University, with an academic background in cultural anthropology, dance, ethnology, and archives management. She writes and lectures on design science, virtual worlds, next generation geographic information systems, information visualization, and the culture of cyberspace. Kurt Przybilla is an inventor, writer, producer and educator. He invented Teratops and is a co-creator, writer, and producer of the Molecularium project at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where he has produced and co-written Molecules to the Max, a 3D animated film for giant screen IMAX theaters, Molecularium, an award-winning digital dome feature, and Nanospace, a game-based online theme park to teach kids about atoms and molecules. And we also have John Crawford, who is an intermedia artist, interaction designer, performance director, and technology developer. He is a professor of intermedia arts at University of California, Irvine, where he initiated and directs the Emergent Media Design Lab, featuring a range of projects, courses, and collaboratories that integrate socially engaged art making with emergent media and connected design. And I'm really fortunate to be part of that cohort of people who are working with John in the Living Systems Collaboratory. So yeah, I just want to welcome you into having a conversation here about what does synergetics mean? What is the geometry of thinking? What is systems thinking and philosophy? So yeah, I would love to maybe just welcome you, Bonnie, just to, you've been a curator of the work of Buckminster Fuller for a good while. So I'd love to hear how did that come about, and how has that inspired your work?
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks everybody at BFI. I'm just so inspired by the huge visions that everybody has right now, and so really want to actually give a little bit of a bridge, less to my connection to Bucky, since it goes way back to the last 3 years of his life when I was very young student. And but what I see with regenerations is this continuing growth and regrowth of the same brilliant ideas that all of you have. You're saying things we said 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago. And that kind of connects to the importance of the Bauhaus framework of really looking at universal principles of technological innovation that that really define these groups of people that were right there at that moment in time when science was really turning into being physicalized at the turn of the last century. And the wars came in between and tore so much down. And what we had was so many people going from Germany and different countries to America and forming new enclaves. And then the rise of Black Mountain College, which really had the same values and was, you know, started by Joseph and Annie Albers. In 33, Walter Gropius was one of the first teachers. Bucky knew all these people, not just during that time, but they came to his talks in 1928 when he was first talking about the Dymaxion house. He was so hugely inspired by Le Corbusier and his modular system. Modularity was a key framework for the way we approach architecture or re-envisioning our cities. And I think that the term weaponry to livingry that Bucky used could also be this whole thing where we reframe the whole world. After a war, you have to rebuild. You don't want to build the way that we built before. We know what we've learned from all of these different incarnations of humanity and incarnations of creativity. So I know we're supposed to talk about synergetics, but I see in synergetics the same thing. You know, you have these nested realities, but you have to apply that to everything and to time and to space. And a lot of people are talking about nested realities in space, but what about the way history changes? What is the best systems view of history? Where do we see this continual occurrence of great ideas by people that think that, yeah, I mean, they're full generations ahead, and they have very little memory of a lot of people, these lost histories that came before. So I'm inspired right now by listening to everybody to now take this systems view of nested, which can be modeled very easily and understood by building and taking things apart and rebuilding, is to apply that systems view to the way that I approach history. So that's my new project that I just got inspired by today from all of you. So I want to thank you for that. And I hope that in the next generation or so, we will have this more encompassing view where we have that long view of the world through time and the regenerative view through space, that we've been here before. All of us have been through the same cycle before. It's not like reincarnation, but we were them. We know we've been in this place of the seeds just starting to grow again, and seeing the networking of nature and moving back to nature as the source of all of our creativity. So that's my little prayer for all of you, and thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, just the way you're weaving in the whole, like the time and space, thinking of all those nested systems and different scales of being able to navigate. Not only, like Bucky was really a lot about navigation because that's where he came from, but it's one of the projects that I'm trying to explore as well. It's like, how do we explore all of these nested systems and different scales of time and space? And that's, I think, one of the things that you can speak to, Kurt, is just, you know, how you're dealing with teaching children about molecules and how we understand where's all this movement and energy, and what is space? How do we think of that as just, is it an emptiness, or is it a vacuum or plenum of
well, certainly one of the things that I have to start with just thanking all of you for being here and all of the builders who have made this happen. The thing that attracted me to Fuller is that he actually talks about these questions more than anybody that I've encountered, and the idea of synergy is something that he promoted. He didn't come up with it. It was a term that he borrowed from chemistry, because all chemical reactions are synergetic, where the whole is more than the parts taken separately, and that's where he starts. So when you talk about nested scales, he always started with universe and started every problem is approached from that comprehensive perspective, which is what's really inspiring to me, because it seems to me the most important consideration is where you start looking at things. You have to go from macro to the micro, because as you go up in scale, you can't predict the effect of bringing things together. All of the technology that we are utilizing at this very moment is a result of the whole history of the universe in his comprehensive perspective. And when you start to think about things that way, I would point to Critical Path is where he has the history of scientific inventions and artifacts of humanity very close to the sapien. It maps pretty close to that, but talking about all of our understandings and these concepts. And he starts with the first industrial tool being language, because it's the ability to communicate those concepts and humans being able to understand that. as opposed to all other living species on the planet, I would argue at least that when I'm talking to my cat, she doesn't fully understand the concepts that I'm talking about in any way. It's a human ability, and that is something that Bucky always pointed to, and that was the unlimited metaphysical resource that we will always be able to draw upon. And the conversation about life and death, they go together, and Fuller would talk about them as complementary forces of the universe, like concave and convex. You can't have life without death, and all life springs from it. And I like that this conversation incorporates that, because it's something that humans have understood for a very long time, and farmers in particular, and composting. But all of the ideas of the past lead us to what we're thinking now. And I am inspired, and Bucky talked about it, how humans would be connected by these networks of computers and be able to have the most, he talked about it in '62, and it was published in the book Education Automation. But that's what, he was very interested, and especially at that time when he was working at SIU, Southern Illinois University, where he came up with the design science decade, and the idea of the world game, where making the world work for 100% of humanity, was being more formalized, and where he was pitching it for what would happen in the Dome in Montreal, for the American Pavilion, but then later kept developing. And this was towards the end of his life. Actually, Antony's quote from 1983 was the year that Bucky died. It was only 4 months before he passed away that he was saying that. And his experience through as being in the Navy in World War I, then in World War II, he was working with the U.S. War Board, and he looked at it, and he felt that it was humanity's critical, he called it humans' critical moment, where we had to move from weaponry to livingry, or we would kill everything. At that time, the Cold War and the focus of technology on obliterating life on the planet, he pointed to the Apollo project of the whole goal was actually ferrying people and keeping them alive, using all this technology alive and back, was a good thing, even though it was militarily driven, really. And that the spaceship Earth metaphor was all about making us realize that we're all together on a single planet and spaceship. And I think that idea and the spontaneous cooperation that's happening right now, I mean, the level and depth of this conversation and the many conversations and connectivity that is being technologically enabled right now is what inspires me. And I believe, like Fuller thought, we have the ability to actually have everybody live at a higher standard of living than ever before imagined on the planet through a design science revolution. And it's through design that it's going to happen. And so I think that all of this energy being focused on that in the conversations is going to lead to those things, but it's the intention and the goals and reorienting it to actually that. The talk about the narratives out of Hollywood, helping people to do that. I think children naturally want to, and most people want to teach their children to do this. So I think that it's possible, and I think I'm very optimistic and happy to see all of the energy that's going towards it right now, and the efforts of the BFI to make these connections and build networks that will keep focus on that and help to develop it.
And just thinking about how, you're focused on bringing these ideas to children and helping the next generation really understand. I think what this discussion really is about is how do we give space and opportunity for the next generation to really live into that. And I think that's what you were speaking to, John, in your work. with the University of California, Irvine, you're part of an emergent media design lab, right? And what's emerging here is you have this opportunity to be part of that curation of how do you empower people to be able to really live into that. So I'd love to hear more about how you're thinking in terms of systems philosophy.
Thank you, Stephen. And thanks to the entire team for pulling this wonderful event together. I really feel like we're putting wonderful pearls, jewels on this strand that we're making over time and space. So thank you very much for that. And so here we all are on the internet. We've heard some discussion throughout today's sessions about the Bauhaus, and it was nice to hear Bonnie's connection to the work of Black Mountain College. And I'd like to just point out, and I think many of you are already aware of the wonderful art and art making that came out of Black Mountain College. Artists like Robert Rauschenberg and John Cage got their start in that world and were intimately connected, even though they didn't necessarily discuss the philosophy in great detail. The philosophies that have been described here, coming from Bucky and others through the work of Black Mountain College, definitely influenced these people and really profoundly influenced the art making of the last half and even the first part of the 20th and 21st centuries. I also would like to bring everybody's attention to another alum of Black Mountain College that had a huge impact, who had a huge impact. That is Merce Cunningham, the choreographer, who maybe is not as well known as people like Rauschenberg and Cage, but his work, as I understand it, really provided the substrate for so much of what the two of them did. You know, Rauschenberg was Cunningham's set designer. Cage was Cunningham's musical director and composer. They traveled together in a Volkswagen van around the US, giving performances for 8 people or 20 people or 100 people, whoever was willing to sit still for what the crazy stuff that they were doing seemed crazy at the time. Today, it just seems visionary and transformative. So all of those artists, of course, were extremely influential to my work. But I'd like to cast our mind back to our collective mind in this session, back to the beginnings of the Bauhaus, 100 years ago, roughly, right? What was happening in Western culture at the time the Bauhaus emerged? Well, one of the things that was happening was that the life of filmmaking, the technology, the culture of filmmaking was, you know, around 30, 40 years old. Filmmaking was really, really new stuff. Kind of in the way the internet is for us today. You know, think about the World Wide Web came into formation. The internet really started to hit culture, popular culture, in the last 30, 40 years. So even though the Bauhaus itself was not particularly devoted to filmmaking, I'm going to try to take us on a little journey to help us understand some of the parallels between the evolution of filmmaking back in the day and the evolution of the Bauhaus, and how they kind of came together in an important way, and then how we may be at a similar inflection point. Well, I think we are at a similar inflection point today with regard to the internet and other similar technologies. So, you know, the earliest things that happened with filmmaking from a cultural perspective in the 20th century, the early parts of the 20th century, were the technology of filmmaking started to develop a series of language constructs, things that we take for granted today 100%. But at the time, these were brand new things that emerged from that technology. Think of the term wide shot, long shot, close-ups, montage, you know, putting clips together in order. All of these things had to be invented, and they were invented to respond to the technological innovation that came from the world of filmmaking. So the language of film, which of course is much bigger than the 4 constructs I just put out, came from there. Also, the mechanisms of projection had a huge influence. We didn't project film before film was made, but once film projection started, we've never looked back. And so these technologies really gave us a way of perceiving and looking at the world. And these mechanisms not only changed the way we experience entertainment, they changed all aspects of human culture in a really profound way. Think about how all of the technologies of film and projection influenced poetry, architecture, music, painting. Painting changed irrevocably with the advent of film, even though film was not a painterly medium particularly. And I think it's important to understand how politics changed at the same time. Now, whether politics changed filmmaking or filmmaking changed politics, it's hard to say. Obviously, technology is not neutral. It has a role in these things. But the strategies of filmmaking, strategies like cutting, pasting, juxtaposition, layering, simultaneity, all brand new concepts that didn't exist in the same way before the technology of film existed, ended up affecting politics. Think about the, you can look at a film as consisting of rhythmic organization of contrasting experiences in a way that was not possible before the advent of film technologies. All of these things, cutting, pasting, juxtaposition, layering, simultaneity, rhythmic organizations of contrasting experiences, all these things also became strategies for disrupting and interrogating the power of the state. So where, I'm not talking here I'm not really talking here about, film as a polemic device. I'm talking about how the underlying languages and technologies that arose through the advent of filmmaking and projection had these parallel impacts in the world. So these ways of understanding experience, relating to experience, interacting through experience, provided, I contend, a human ability originating in Western culture, but now permeating through the world, for these technologies to allow us to develop a deeper understanding of the nature of consciousness, of how the mind works. We see these things totally different now after all of the changes that have happened since the early days of the Bauhaus. So where are we today? 30 to 40 years into the evolution of the internet, the World Wide Web. These are now technologies that are at this inflection point that maybe is similar or parallel in some ways to the inflection point that the Bauhaus didn't cause, the Bauhaus was not the result of, but simultaneously, synergistically perhaps, evolved in parallel. And I think we are at this wonderful point right now. The Design Science Studio, the Living Systems Collaboratory, the work of all of us, all of you, really is an important part of that. So really interesting to think about these concepts and to see how we can weave them together into a conversation for the limited amount of time we have left.
And that's amazing how all of these different conversations about how we can look back into time and space and then feel like all of these ideas are coming to a sort of convergence where even just us coming together, a kind of gathering of ideas, of people, of even just past influences. So the things that have been composting for many, many, many years are coming to a sort of fruition, seeding what could come in the future. And it feels like we're just learning, right? How do we communicate? How do we connect? How do we collaborate? And it just feels like this is the moment that we can start seeing those things actually manifesting into the world. And just being part of the Design Science Studio has been such an amazing experience. I had no idea this was going to happen this year. And here I am talking to such amazing visionaries, all of you and everyone who's been involved in the Design Science Salon. I'm so thankful for everyone who's brought their efforts and and skills and talents into making this possible, I'm so grateful. But right now, I'm sorry that we need to bring this event to a close, but we're not going to actually just leave it there, because what I want to do next, given a little bit of a break, so we have Brad Jarvis and we also have Stephen Levitt, who are joining us to do something where we're going to bring these ideas together and think about how we can find that center, find a set of values that we want to move into intention and into actual artifacts that we can test in the real world, and then maybe out of that create some architecture. But I think we start with personal resilience, and then out of that build to these larger nested scales. So we want to start small to make sure that these things are not going to have some unintended consequences, designing for resilience. But I think we have a way forward, just the way we can see the difference between competition has its place, but if it's dominant, if it's taking over everything, then it doesn't allow for collaboration. And that's, I think, what we want to weave into next, is just how do we live together as a living system, coming to a new consciousness and finding a new way of building maybe social architecture that grows from a real core of integrity. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. And this could have gone on a lot longer. I feel like we could go all day with this conversation. This is just the opening of such a deep and rich conversation with the three of you that we've never brought together, actually, John, Bonnie, and Kurt. So to be continued for sure, because this is a really deep conversation. And I want to say thank you for bringing in some of the skirts of history of Bucky in the Bauhaus. I feel like that also could be a very, very in-depth, long conversation. I also want to say thank you to Stephen for moderating and hosting this session, and to all, Kurt and to Bonnie for being here and helping get these creative juices flowing for us, and really moving into some really deeper thought on the Bauhaus and synergy and synergetics. And I feel like we barely touched on it, but we are moving on now to the vision train and to the workshop. And I did want to put a couple links into the chat here. If you haven't been in Topia, it's quite fun, and there's a lot to see and do within Topia. So I'm going to put a link here. Please join us in Topia. The next session is called Vision Train, and we'll be seeing live art performances and music from a number of the different artists from the Design Science Studio, as well as some keynote speakers. And we'd love for you to invite your friends. So if you haven't done so already, please do invite your friends. There's a code I'll also put into the chat here that gives you a 20% discount, or gives your friends a 20% discount. And again, this is a collaborative effort, and the proceeds go to the Design Science Studio, and then that trickles down to the artist, and that goes back to the artist. So please do think about donating. I'll put that link into the chat as well. And then I just wanted to give another really big shout out to all of the artists that came in today, and the creators and the keynote speakers. This has been really deep, rich conversations. Unfortunately, they haven't been long enough to dive in. I feel like there's so much there. But please do stay tuned, and there'll be a lot more from here. I'm going to let you all go off mute. If you have questions, please do ask. Okay, if there are no questions, so there's a couple different Zooms that we could be going to. So All of the Zooms are in the chat. If you want to jump into the vision train, here is the Zoom for the vision train. Then there's also the workshop, which is also on a different Zoom. Lots of different Zooms today. And I'm gonna wait till everybody leaves. If you guys have any questions or shout outs or thank you, John. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Maxine. Thank you, William. We appreciate all of you.
Thank you, Faith.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Faith.
Thank you, Faith.
Thank you again, Stephen. That was incredible.